So what if the very thing that was supposed to crash the economy, Trump's tariffs, actually triggered a $3 trillion investment into the United States?
Once upon a time, we had an auto industry in Detroit. Then some genius named Bill Clinton signs the North American Free Trade Agreement, or corporations, you can screw Americans and go get cheap labor in Mexico and break the unions by going to Canada. Now, if you were General Motors, I'd say, it's like my birthday.
Yeah.
But if you're a worker who comes from Michigan or Ohio, they just signed, you know what they signed? Worst statistic I'm going to tell you today. Average life expectancy.
Now, you've probably seen all the headlines. Trade war with China. Tariffs are going to crash the stock market. Experts were warning us that President Trump's aggressive tariff strategy would cause inflation, destroy jobs, and send the market crashing. Some people even thought that Trump wanted a crash on purpose to force the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates or let his insiders buy the dip. And for a while, it looked like maybe they were right. The VIX Fear and Greed Index went up, the stock market went down, Bitcoin had a correction, and tariffs became the villain in every headline. But something surprising just happened. Instead of the economic disaster we were told, President Trump's tariffs triggered over $3 trillion in new investments recently, flowing back into American factories, supply chains, and jobs. So in today's video, I want to explain what actually happened and why this was not the plan to crash the market, but a strategy to reset the global economy and bring manufacturing back into the United States. And by the end of this video, you'll see why a policy that was called reckless is now reindustrializing the United States, changing global trade, and making a really strong case for staying invested in the market, even when it seems like everything is falling apart. So let's get into one of the most interesting parts of history that led us to this point, because this story actually starts way before President Trump tweeted about tariffs. So let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andrei Jikh. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for the economic plot twist. Now, when Donald Trump says, "Make America great again," the question is, when was that exactly? Because he's not just talking about vibes or slogans. He's referring to actually a very specific economic era in American history, and that era was before 1913.
America was built on tariffs with no income tax. No income tax till 1913.
And the government didn't need your paycheck to run the country because tariffs funded everything. America was booming. The US was the richest country on earth, and the US had so much money, it didn't know what to do with it. Literally, there was something called blue ribbon commissions, whose job was to figure out how to spend the surplus. That's the America President Trump wants to return to, and his use of tariffs wasn't random. It was part of a bigger strategy to rebuild that original economic engine. And that brings us to a recent interview with Howard Lutnick on the All In podcast, which lays this out better than almost anything I've seen, and I want to share it with you. Because to understand Trump's tariff strategy, we need to rewind to the end of World War II.
It's 1945. We need to rebuild the world. Okay, so we decide we're going to take our tariffs down. And we'll let them, here's the key, we'll let them have tariffs be up. And we will export the power of our economy to let them rebuild.
Now, this policy was what's called the Marshall Plan applied to trade. By opening the US market, we fueled the recovery of Europe and Japan, later giving the same benefit to Southeast Asia and Korea and other countries. And the strategy made sense at the time because the world needed to be rebuilt, and the US could help make that happen.
And then what happens? We have the 50s, and we have the Korean War. So we let them rebuild, which means low tariffs here, high tariffs there. Low tariffs here, high tariffs there. Then we have the Vietnam War, right? So now all of a sudden we have all of Southeast Asia. Low tariffs here, high tariffs there.
But the problem is, we forgot to reset those terms. So decades passed, and a lot of countries kept their tariffs high and trade barriers long after they were competitive. In case after case, allies and trading partners kept their protective policies, which was a huge disadvantage to US exporters, while American markets stayed wide open. Now by the 2000s, the US had one of the lowest tariff policies in the world, averaging around 3 to 4%, compared to partners like India and the EU, which had tariffs many times higher than the US. And this imbalance weakened some US industries.
There is no country in this world that is free trade. Zero. And we are the lowest and the dumbest.
And by dumbest, he means US leaders of both parties allowed a playing field that was tilted against American workers for a really long time. So by the time NAFTA came around, US factories closed or moved overseas, and whole communities paid the price. In fact, we know this to be true by measuring the life expectancy of Americans without a college degree.
By the way, the United States of America, 2/3 is high school educated, 1/3 is college educated. The difference today of average life expectancy between those two categories is 7 years. 7-year average life expectancy. It's not the air, it's not the food, it's not the medicine, it's despair.
So this was the backdrop for President Trump's thinking on trade, which, believe it or not, he talked about since the 1980s, way before he ever ran for president.
The fact is that you don't have free trade. We think of it as free trade, but you right now don't have free trade. And I think a lot of people are tired of watching other countries ripping off the United States. This is a great country.
So now let's fast forward to 2016. By the time President Trump stepped into office, the damage was already done because America spent decades watching its factories move overseas, its workers laid off, and its industries destroyed, while countries like China and India, and even our own allies, kept their tariffs high and their trade barriers locked in. So President Trump decided to fight back by asking a really simple question: who has the power? What he means is, have you ever heard of the saying, the customer is always right? Well, the United States is the world's biggest consumer. The US buys everything from everyone, which means the United States holds most of the leverage. So President Trump comes in and he uses a tool that most economists consider outdated and dangerous: tariffs. But he wasn't using them to punish consumers or to crash the market like the headlines were saying. Instead, he was using them as leverage to force renegotiation of global trade and to bring back money, production, and power back to the United States. He believes access to the US market was a privilege and not a right, and if other countries want to keep selling to the US, they'd have to start playing fair. Every time he raised the pressure, the media said the same thing: Trump is crashing the economy, tariffs are inflationary, and this will trigger a recession. But what they didn't say is that pain was the point. It was pressure, strategic pressure. As a result, though, there's now going to be over 1 million new jobs and over $3 trillion of new investments from countries like the UAE, which just committed $1.4 trillion into the US over the next 10 years. Saudi Arabia promised over $600 billion of new investment. Apple announced an insane $500 billion over the next 4 years, which is exactly how long President Trump will be president for. OpenAI, Oracle, and Japan's SoftBank committed $500 billion, $285 billion from Siemens. Taiwan's TSMC committed $100 billion. Johnson & Johnson plans to invest more than $55 billion over the next 4 years. Eli Lilly, $27 billion. And even car manufacturers like Honda and Hyundai announced tens of billions of dollars of their own. And this comes from just the first 2 months of Mr. Trump's presidency. So the question is, why did everyone get all of this so wrong? And here's where most people got it wrong, especially when it comes to inflation, and Howard Lutnick explained this perfectly. Imagine 2 bottles of water. One is made in the US and the other one is from Fiji, and they both cost $1. Now, if the US slaps a 20% tariff on the Fiji bottle, it now costs $1.20. But the US bottle is still $1. That's not inflation, that's a consumption tax. And you as a consumer still get to choose which one you want to buy. But now let's say the government prints another $1 trillion overnight. Suddenly, there's twice as much money chasing the same 2 water bottles. And now both water bottles just cost more. That's inflation, which is not caused by tariffs. Instead, it's caused by printing money. So while everyone was pointing fingers at tariffs and blaming them for inflation and economic ruin, something else was happening behind the scenes. And that's what most people missed. But now, let me take a quick pause from the finance talk to talk about your internet privacy. Today's video is sponsored by CyberGhost VPN, one of the most trusted VPN providers out there, with over 38 million users worldwide and a near perfect score on Trustpilot. That's over 20,000 people rating it excellent, which is honestly pretty rare. Most people think incognito mode is enough to stay private online, but it's not. Your internet provider, your job, your school, coffee shop, Wi-Fi, and even all the websites you visit can still track everything you do. CyberGhost VPN encrypts your internet traffic and reroutes it through secure servers in over 100 countries, hiding your IP addresses and protecting your data. Not even CyberGhost themselves can see what you're doing because they don't keep logs. It also unlocks content from over 40 streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney+. So if you're traveling or you just want to explore shows from other regions, you're covered. It works on up to 7 devices at once, so you can protect your entire digital life or share it with your family. And the best part is you can get it for just $2.03 a month with 4 months for free, a 40-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 support. Use the link in the description to grab the deal and start protecting your online privacy today. Thank you, CyberGhost, for sponsoring this part of the video, and now let's get back to it. So now I want to share with you how I'm treating this news and how I'm personally investing. Now, I'm no Jim Cramer, but he did say a sell-off should not scare investors. And one of the scariest things an investor can hear, besides hearing everything's gonna be okay from Mr. Cramer, is that this time is gonna be different. And some people say that these next 4 years will be some of the biggest wealth-generating years of our lifetime. And that might be true, but there will always be reasons why this time the economy really is different from all the other times. But here's what you should remember about the market to increase your chances of building that generational wealth. And I'm gonna sound like a broken record, and chances are you've heard all of this before, so this next part is mostly just a reminder for myself to stay invested and never bet against the United States. So the stock market is forward-looking. It doesn't care about today's fear and today's greed. It cares about tomorrow's growth. And during Trump's presidency, from 2017 to 2020, the S&P 500 returned almost 50%, even with all the chaos, the trade wars, the interest rate battles, and even a global pandemic in the final year. Why? Because despite all that noise, a huge economic shift took place. Supply chains were being rebuilt, factories were coming back, and $3 trillion is now being redirected back into America. And historically, that's when wealth is made, right when it feels like everything might be falling apart. Now, Warren Buffett said, "Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful." And believe it or not, there's actually a fear index that tracks all of this. It's called the VIX, short for Volatility Index, and it spikes when investors panic. In March 2020, during the COVID crash, the VIX hit over 80, which was higher than the 2008 financial crisis. But here's the crazy part. From March of 2009 to February 2020, right before COVID, the market experienced the longest bull run in US history. The S&P 500 gained over 400%, and trying to time that would have been impossible. A study from Fidelity found that the best performing accounts were owned by people who had either forgotten about them or had passed away because they never tried to time the market. They just held on. Another study showed that from 2003 to 2022, a $10,000 investment would have grown to over $500,000 if you stayed fully invested from 1988 to 2024. But if you were gonna try to time the market and you missed just the top 5 best days in the stock market out of 37 years, that would leave you with $330,000, which is still a lot of money, but that's 37% less. And if you miss just the top 10 best days out of 37 years, you would have less than half of what you could have made. And it gets progressively worse from there. And the crazy part is that the best days come right after the worst days, right after those crashes and corrections when that VIX fear index spikes, and right when people say, This time, it's gonna be different. So if you panic sell during those moments, especially when you read a headline like the one about Trump crashing the market, you don't just miss the comeback, you miss all the magic of compound interest. And the point is that no one knows what happens next, but history shows one thing. The winners are the people who stay invested through the fear, through the headlines, even the ones that say Trump and the tariffs are really bad. So personally, I'm staying invested so I could get that magic of compound interest. But in the meantime, don't forget to check out the link in the description down below to get the special discount for CyberGhost VPN. The app will protect your data while you browse and give you full access to blocked content on the internet for only $2.03 a month, totally risk-free. Again, the link is down in the description below. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to see you back here next week. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.